Hello, in this video, let's look at a typical CMOS process flow and let's look at how an inverter is made in a CMOS process flow. So this simple flow that I'm describing here captures the salient element of process flows. Please note that modern transistor process flows are way more complicated and way more involved than what is being discussed in this video. But I hope that this gives you a flavor of the kind of concerns one would have when you look at process flows. Now, transistor flows typically comprise of multiple photolithography layers that are used to define the various features of the device. We'll also try and use this process flow to understand what it means to have design rules and how do these design rules come from the process flow that is used in the fab. So typically all transistor fabrication starts with the silicon wafer, and once the wafer is cleaned, you put down a dummy thermal oxide and a nitride on top of it. Once this is done, the next step is to essentially define where our transistors are going to go. So this is known as the active region, and this is marking out the area where your eventual PMOS and NMOS are going to be located. So once this mask is exposed, you have photoresist covering the active areas of the device, and then you etch the nitride hard mask and followed with removal of the photoresist, and then you etch down trenches into the silicon. So what are these trenches for? Now these trenches are put into silicon because we want to isolate these two transistors which are next to each other. So this process is known as electrical isolation or isolation of the two transistors. Now, to achieve that isolation, what we do is once the trenches are done, we fill it up with oxide. So therefore, if you create a transistor in this surface and a transistor in this surface, this region essentially ensures that no field from this transistor is going to influence the characteristics of the transistor here. So once the oxide is filled, the next step is the oxide chemical mechanical polish, where the hard mask or the nitride is used as an etch stop for the CMP. And this basically, as I mentioned, has created an electrical isolation between these two adjacent transistors. Right? So the first step is we have marked out which area we're going to build the transistor, and we have created an isolation between the two transistors. So the next step now is to form the wells. So we remove the hard mask, and when we define the N well region, right? Or in other words, we want to define the region which is going to form the PMOS transistor, right? So we remove the resist from where the PMOS is supposed to be and then implant it with phosphorus. And phosphorus is going to ensure that this region becomes N-type silicon, and then we remove the photoresist. This is again followed with the next side, which is the P-well lithography. So again there we expose the region where we want to create the NMOS and now do a BF2 implant. BF2 is boron fluoride, and boron fluoride basically dopes the surface with boron atoms and creating a P-type silicon in this region. Once that is done, we remove the resist. Now an important step after this is both these have been implanted with species. We have created a phosphorus implant here and a boron implant here. Now prior to doing any poly deposition etc., what we do is we use what is known as a drive-in anneal, which sets the depth of the well. Right? So the depth of the well again is important to basically set the resistivity of the well, and it's also used to set how deep your junctions etc. are going to be in the NMOS. Once that is done, we again now follow it up with a dummy oxide dep, and then we do a deposition of the poly. Now note that this is a dummy poly dep. So till the early 2000s, the gate stack used in silicon transistors used to be polysilicon on SiO2. What we use these days is essentially a high-K metal gate. So this poly is essentially put in earlier in the flow and acts as a placeholder for the gate. Now the reason we do that is we have to eventually create the source drain junctions in the NMOS and the PMOS, and those typically require high temperature anneals. Metal that is used for the gate work function and eventual metal fill cannot tolerate those high temperatures. So what we do is we use this poly, create the junctions, and then come in later and replace the poly with the metal gate. So once we put down the poly, the next step involved is actual doing the lithography. So this is a very critical step because this dimension is the gate length of the transistor. So again, this is again a very expensive layer in your tape out, and this layer is going to determine the gate length and eventual performance of your transistor. So your extra care is taken to ensure that the profile of the photoresist is as straight as possible at this step. Now with this photoresist as a mask, you come in and define the poly length of the transistor. So again, when you design this etch, you have to be careful that whatever is this dimension is maintained all the way till the bottom of the poly, because this is eventually going to be the gate length of the transistor. So once the poly is defined, we then remove the photoresist and then now begin with the process of creating the source and drain in the PMOS and the NMOS. So the next step is, before we do that, we want to create a spacer around the poly. So that basically means that you put down a conformer layer of an oxide or a nitride and then etch it anisotropically to create this spacer. Now this spacer is important because as we dope the source drains, we don't want the doping to run under the gate, and so the spacer ensures that the doping stays in the source drain. Now again, the next thing now is we have to create the NMOS and PMOS separately. Why is that? Because the source drain of the NMOS consists of N+, whereas the source drain of the PMOS consists of silicon germanium. And so what we do again here is we will essentially open up where the NMOS is going to be and protect the PMOS. What we do there is, once that area is opened up, we create a raised source drain. So again, other classes will tell you as to why raised source drain is important, but all transistors today have raised source drains to improve the drive strength of the transistor. And once the source drain deposition is done, we then dope it with N-type, and we do a high doping density of N-type so that we get the N+ region in the source drain. Once that is done, we have essentially created the N+ source drain, and we can remove the photoresist that was present on the PMOS. The step after that now is to create the PMOS source drains. So now again we'll protect the NMOS, and what we now do is we replace the source drain regions in the PMOS with strained silicon germanium, and what this does is this provides compressive strain on the silicon, which allows us to create transistors with high hole mobility. So once the silicon germanium stressors are created in the PMOS, we then remove the photoresist from the NMOS. So now you've created the backbone of the transistor, right? So this is your PMOS with silicon germanium source drains and N well and the gate peak defined. The NMOS here is being created in a P well with N+ source drains and the gate. So we have formed the backbone of the transistors. Now all that is left is to ensure that we put in the right material in the gate and then follow it up with contacts. So once this is done, we normally put down an oxide layer to passivate everything. So the intent of this oxide layer is to ensure that we protect what we have created in the PMOS and NMOS from any external process induced defects that might occur. So again, we put down an oxide, and once that is done, we then polish the oxide down till the top of the poly. So coming out of the step, we have only the poly exposed in the gate and everything else is buried under the oxide. This step is then followed by a poly removal. So now that we have used the poly, so the dummy poly was there to create the source drains. So once the source drains have been created, the use of the poly is over. So we remove the dummy poly from the gate, and once that is done, we put down the high K and the metal gate. in the both the NMOS and the PMOS. So this blue represents the metal gate, the red represents the high K. So the high K and the metal gate are put down one after the other, and this sets the work function of the NMOS gate, sets the work function of the PMOS gate. So once that is done, the next step involved is using a CMP process to remove the metal from the areas which are not the gate. So again, here you see that using a metal CMP is much better because it's easier to remove this metal rather than using an etch chemistry. So here again, now we have created the full transistor. So the transistor is complete with the right gate stack. Now all that is left is to put down the contacts. So this is again followed with a deposition of an interlayer dielectric. Once this interlayer dielectric is deposited, the next step is now forming the contacts. So you have a step which defines the contact holes, followed by a photoresist, and then you expose the contact holes, and then follow it up with an etch in the oxide. So at this step you have created trenches in the region where the eventual contact metal is going to sit in. So once this is done, you remove the photoresist. This is now followed with filling up the entire stack with the contact metal. So today, if you look at the latest process flows, people have been using tungsten, and recent flows also use cobalt. So these are refractory materials used here primarily because of the high current densities that these contacts have. So the contact metal depth is followed with a contact metal CMP, where again the metal is removed from the areas where you don't want the metal. And now that you have done this, essentially the heart of the transistor is complete. So we've now finished all transistor fabrication. What is left now is all the metals, so the way or the back end stack, if you will. So following this, everything else that's done is repetitive, basically putting down dielectric metal, so on and so forth. So now you come down with the backend ILD. Now this is followed with a via. So we typically have vias on top of contacts. So we do a via lithography and etch deep to wherever the via has to land on, which in this case is the contacts. Once the via etch is complete, we remove the photoresist. Now in this process flow, I'm showing what is known as a damascene process. So remember, in the back end, that is, all these metal connections are now going to happen using copper lines. So once the photoresist is stripped, before filling in the vias, we also do a metal 1 lithography right after via lithography is complete. And so this essentially defines the metal trenches. So what we do is, one with lithography, we etch not as deep as the via, but till whatever we want our metal depth to be. So we've essentially created regions where the metal line is going to run, and then this is the via. So if you look top down, you have a metal which is shorting the drains of the PMOS and the NMOS, and this metal is connected to the drain of the PMOS here and the drain of the NMOS here. Now once we've done that, once we've done the trench etch of metal, we remove the photoresist. And then we come, because we have to put down copper, we use an electroplating technique to put down copper. So now when we do electroplating, copper is deposited both in the vias and in the metal lines in one go. And this is known as a dual damascene process. So once the copper is deposited, this is followed with the copper CMP. And at this step, essentially, you've created the metal lines and the vias. Right, so this is the first metal layer. So again, now suppose your process has 13 metal layers. You'll repeat this process multiple times. Every time put on an oxide, then do the via, then do the metal, and then CMP the metal. Right? So the next step is the ILD2 depth, and so on and so forth. Right? So the subsequent metal steps are basically just a repeat of what happens in the metal 1 process. So as I mentioned, the via metal process is repeated for a number of layers that are present. More metal layers means more litho steps, which means more process steps, which means a higher cost, right? So generally, if you look at the foundry offerings, you'll see that the more the metals they have, the higher the cost of fabrication. But sometimes as a user, you might need this because this provides the ability to do tighter packing of circuits because you have a greater number of layers to do interconnections. Additionally, in the backend, which I've not included here, is there are other devices which are available in the backend, and some of these include the MIM capacitors and the inductors. Right? And these are used a lot, especially when you're doing analog design or SOC development. Now, as you've seen in the process flow, each and every layer that we have used in lithography has to be aligned very carefully with subsequent layers. Otherwise, it's possible that the transistor may not function because the transistor may not be created reliably. So, what are layout design rules? So, layout design rules is a document that sets as to how small features can be and how closely can they be reliably packed so as to create a transistor. This is normally delivered by the foundry who has designed the technology. Normally, these features are specified in microns, and you need to pay attention, especially when you're migrating designs across foundries or technologies, because every new node has unique rules that come in at every node. So, porting designs from, say, if you're porting a design from, say, 16 nanometer to 14 nanometer or 14 nanometer to 10 nanometer, is not as straightforward as you where suppose you are porting a design from 10 micron to 3 micron. And the reason being because design rules have become way more complicated, and especially in modern design flows, a lot of new rules come in at every design node, right? And so it's important to keep this in mind. In the past, design rules were specified using what was known as a parameter known as lambda, which represented the resolution of the process. At that time, porting of designs was much easier because all you had to do was change the value of lambda. There were no new rules that came in. Today's design rules have a lot of 2D rules which are there, a lot of density rules, etc., which are there, which make it difficult for migrating designs across technologies. So let's take an example of a couple of design rules. So you can have something as for the active region, I can say that there is a certain minimum length that this active region should have, and there's a certain minimum width that this active region can have. And because there's a CMP process associated with this layer, you also have sometimes what are known as active area density rules. Similarly, if you look at the poly, right, you want to ensure that the poly extends beyond the active region, right? So you have a rule which says what should be this minimum overlap between poly and active. You also want to ensure that this N-well that you've created has some overlap between the active and the N-well, and this is to ensure that in the worst process variation, this N-well always covers the active, so I always ensure that this region is doped N-type. Right? Similarly, you have rules for P-well. Again, you'll have a poly to poly spacing rule. Now, in this case, because we're doing an inverter, it's not that big a deal, but this will also dictate how close you can space your polys. A lot of rules show up in the backend, and these typically include via to via spacing, that is how close I can place these two vias, what should be the overlap of the metal with respect to the via, because you always want the metal to overlap the via, else you might have an open connection here. Additionally, we have via density rules and metal density rules. Again, because these are very CMP heavy processes, density is very critical to ensure that there is a production worthy flow available. So, design of digital circuits is normally based on standard cells. We do have a lot of tools available for design, and basically today if you look at a basic design flow, you can directly convert your HDL into the gate level and transistor level. However, you need the knowledge of the process from design rules. Basically, if you want to design any blocks, especially custom design blocks that provide competitive advantage over the others. So hence understanding process flow, understanding design rules, understanding what design rules can be modified or what design rules can be relaxed will provide another competitive advantage for you.